Katie, will you call the roll, please?
Sure. Laney Rozga,
Here?
Tim O'Connor,
Here.
Karen Peltola,
Here.
Karen Mao,
Here.
Kelly Greavy,
Here.
Liz Lasky,
Here?
John Veach is absent, excused.
Yes, he had another commitment before he was appointed.
Okay.
Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Somebody make a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Are there any citizens for public comment? It doesn't appear to be. Any correspondence? There was a little bit from Jen Teller regarding Morton Park, and we've acknowledged it, and she had some good ideas.
Yeah.
Committee reports, concessions?
Obviously, we talked.
Yes.
Obviously, I sent an email to Ed Bradford.
And you gave Laney's number?
Yep.
Ed's, on the concessions, Tim and Laney have offered to work with Ed Bradford because Jeff kind of stepped back because he was connected and wanted to, not be involved in it. So, thank you, Tim, you gave him. So if you don't hear from him,
Oh, yeah, we'll keep up with that.
Okay.
Evidently, the advertisement's gone out, right, for the concession stand?
I don't think it has yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
No, I don't
No, and I
think
think
it has.
Ed's out of the office until Monday.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I don't think it has yet.
No, I don't think it has either.
Okay. The budget, I don't think we've gotten together yet on that.
Nope, we haven't.
No, so we won't report on that. Morton Park, Kelly? anything to-
Liz?
We are getting together, it's moving forward, and we're going to get together with Jeff, who has contacted Sinclair, and we can buy another piece of equipment, I believe, so there'll be something more than what we'd originally planned, but I think it's coming together.
Do you know the amount from what we have to spend now from the grant? Do you know
Not
what that
without
number
looking
is?
it up.
No, not without looking. The grant was 97.5, but a lot of it's going to the softball. I believe we were allocated like the 35, and was it another 15 or so?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, 15 or 20 at the most.
Just to-
There's not much we can get for 15,000.
No, there is not. It'll be basically the same plan we had planned, but the people are excited. The original plan was good. Anything on the grants? The Minger grant was kind of covered with that. The Riverwalk grant.
Without Jeff?
It was in the paper.
There is the Riverwalk grant, there is a walkthrough tomorrow, and Kelly and I are gonna walk through with Bill Gamble, and they're going through with the contractors, right? Possible contractors, so we'll see what they say about that, so that's moving forward, everything's moving forward, so hopefully we'll have to work hard to make sure we get the Morton Park in. New business, winter activities, we might be a little late,
Well, there's no snow.
yeah.
Some of the ideas
No
we had,
winter.
a little.
I do think in the summertime, though, we should talk about our winter activities.
I do too, and I think right now we should just throw out, we got a few minutes, the summer activities. Tim, tell what you said yesterday to me.
I was talking with Liz, I think we're gonna try to do the movies in the park. So we're gonna pick a mark. I got the inflatable screens already come in. I have the professional projector, professional speaker, which will have no doubt be able to amplify the sound with no problem whatsoever. So gonna talk with the Vogue, get with them, and then it's gonna be a partnership with them. And then hopefully we can get, like the Vogue does, they get sponsors, like maybe we'll sponsor the popcorn, or the refreshments. It would be really very minimal setup, to be quite honest with you, because if people bring their lawn chairs and their blankets, we're not setting up chairs or doing anything like that. So we're just setting up the actual movie and be ready to go. So it's gonna be kind of exciting. So we can, I think probably by our next meeting in February or March, we should probably have the agenda set up of what parks we're gonna hit, with the movie theaters. I think the beaches will be popular. Try one at the beach, one at Fifth, one at First. Red Smirski Park would be really good for that. And then kind of move around a little bit. But what do we do? I think monthly, try it.
I may try it.
Yeah, then if it's popular, then
Waters.
maybe look at doing maybe every other week during the summer, see how it goes. But it shouldn't be a bad setup. The problem obviously is going to be setting up what kind of movies we want to watch. Because obviously they gotta be all family
Yeah,
To the beach.
yeah, there you go, Gidget. and the-
Yeah, Liz and I talked about some far-fetched ideas the other night, but I'm not even.
We're limiting it to the
Yeah,
family.
we're gonna bench that right now,
It's
so.
about us too, right?
But yeah, so that's kind of exciting. We'd never done that before, so it's kind of, it introduces people to the park, so I think which is a great idea.
And it went over, I saw it in, Birmingham does it, there are other
Yeah.
towns that do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And the kids come out, you know,
Oh.
it's like, we could make that really fun, and I was even thinking you could do a little raffle, they throw their name in, and we could give them 2 tickets to the Vogue, to the
Oh, yeah.
real theater or something,
I'll
but.
propose that to them, that'd be kind of a cool idea.
Could we do
Yeah,
this
excellent.
House for Morton Park?
Yeah?
Yeah,
Wouldn't that
have a hot dog roast in the afternoon, and say, come back tonight for the movie in the
Absolutely.
park. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of a fun thing that, I think more planning will obviously be done in the upcoming months, but it's hard to believe spring will be here shortly.
I think we should plan and pick the movies and get it all set to go and start advertising that. Any other ideas for the summer that we
Well,
could do?
we have to do the kickoff for the disc golf course.
Yeah.
So we need to set a date so we can get that going, because that's gonna be a grand opening of the disc golf course. So with ribbon cutting,
Is
you
that
know,
be spring now?
yeah, which is
We
coming
should,
up.
yeah, we should set that and decide.
We need to set a date, and I'm gonna look at getting food vendors there, goodies to give the kids, you know, frisbees, you know, all that kind of stuff, get donations coming in for that. But that's a major undertaking, to be quite honest, to do it well. So if we get a date set up, and I can start working on the food trucks, you know, that will be there, and then start getting the publicity out with the advocate of, you know, Manistee Advocate, what we're gonna end up doing with that, so.
So we're saying before Memorial Day.
I think the sooner we could do it, the park's basically done, so I think let's kick off with
Is
that.
everything done with it? The signs are all up?
Nikki, is
I don't
that-
think so.
Okay,
A few more signs to put up, but we got the layout of the, excuse me, of the course with the arrows, next tee, so I believe the initial sign is not installed yet.
So it shouldn't take much to get everything
You
completely.
said so.
Okay. Well, because my thought is to do some type of tournament, you know.
Yes.
that day, you know, so,
it would be neat to have an instructional opportunity too.
Absolutely.
At some point to have,
yeah, obviously we'll coordinate that with Tom,
okay,
because obviously Tom would want to be a part of that,
yes.
that grand opening. So I'll get with Tom, and then we'll,
we need to get with Tom and pick a date, that would be our very first.
well, I think we should pick, honestly, we as a commission should pick the date that we want to do that. I mean, when you're thinking spring, you're talking April,
No,
May?
that's,
May,
Muddy.
May?
May,
Anyway,
Okay, so we pick a, what, weekend? Probably be a Saturday
Saturday.
yeah.
morning?
Yeah, Saturday,
How about Tom with giveaways also? He should have some,
Well, that's what I'm thinking. If we can get with some of these local places that would be benefiting from this park,
Yes.
that would be selling the disc golf, you know, the frisbees and all.
Yes.
I don't know if they call them frisbee, they call them discs.
yes,
Anybody that would have any type of connection, I think would be a good draw. I'd like to see if we can get T-shirts made up, you know, commemorative T-shirts of the kickoff. They do that with most of the events.
Yes.
So we have vendors here in Manistee that they've worked with in the past that probably, I mean, you're looking at a T-shirt, maybe $5, you know, $5 to $10 for a T-shirt, you know, and then come up. Did we come up with a design for the park?
it's on the signs.
Okay, so then we would incorporate that on the T-shirt.
Got it.
Design,
Okay.
and just put the date, you know, the grand opening. I mean, I think we could have a lot of fun with that, to be honest.
How are we
with you.
gonna cover the cost for the t-shirts?
I'll get donors. I mean, we're not, either we sell them cheap at cost, or we find donors, you know, either way. But I honestly think there would be, plus we can use it as a fundraiser too, to be quite honest
Exactly.
with you. If people want to buy T-shirts, $10, $15 for a T-shirt is not bad. And you know, a commemorative disc golf T-shirt, make it a nice design, but.
We should use Third Coast.
Yeah. Hopefully, when I come back in February, we'll have a design for the T-shirt made,
okay.
you know, the front and the back. And then the only thing that would be missing, obviously, is the sponsors on the bottom, you know, of it. Because a lot of times you can get sponsors for the T-shirts.
Right.
To help pay for it.
Yeah, that's a good,
But my only problem is, do I need to get permission from the city council to do all this stuff, or can we just do it?
Who can answer that?
should ask the city council.
So go before the city council and submit a
Katie, do you know?
Proposal, as a proposal, I would.
Yes, they want a proposal and they want, if there's any monetary, and
Okay.
we're probably not looking for too much monetary.
So maybe I'll try to, Katie, to get on there sometime in February on their agenda just to talk about the grand opening and,
And let's also, do we have to ask for permission to show the movies in the park? Let's also bring that.
As a proposal.
As a
yes.
proposal that we'd like to show
Okay.
for,
all right,
for the summer.
okay.
So do 2 in 1 so we don't have to go back again.
Yeah.
No, so we'll just do both at the same time.
Yes.
This is what our activities are planned for the
Exactly.
summer. We'd like to just get your
Here's our
blessings or
intentions,
proposal.
yes.
I'll just do a quick PowerPoint showing what basically what we're gonna do, and then we'll
Okay.
have the design, so.
Perfect.
But I like when we meet in February, to have that all set in stone, ready to go, so.
I
Were we
like-
gonna look at May, the date?
I like
So if we got May dates,
When is the tight lines?
The weekend
good
before
question.
Memorial.
The weekend before Memorial?
Yes, the Friday, Saturday before Memorial.
That's a good question.
We shouldn't do it then,
how about,
should we?
what's day is Memorial Day?
I'll be right with you, sorry. Memorial is 29th,
Oh,
so it'll be
We'll be out and about.
26,
Actually, might be a good
27th.
idea.
I
Is
believe.
the tight lines?
It might be 19, 20 for the tight lines that we have.
So if we did May 20th, we're probably pretty good.
No, that's
19, 20 could be
the
Good.
tight line.
the tight
Maybe it
line.
would be good to do it with the
Yeah.
tight lines. What do you want?
Because everybody's down there.
Oh, you know what? You got a captive audience, that's
Right.
true.
Well, the tight line
Already
is
have
bringing the boats in, right?
Right, it's in
So-
the,
And they're all down there.
Yeah,
they're all down there, they might slip over.
so let's do the 20th, May 20th.
Yeah.
Is that the same?
Bad
as
idea.
Tidelands? I mean, they
It'd
might
be out of
I
their
haven't
way.
had word when exactly it is, but it's normally the weekend before Memorial Day. The way the calendar's set, Memorial Day is on the 29th, so that weekend is 26th, 27th, 28th, so I would assume it'd be that 19, 20, and 21.
And then we should inform Tightlines, we're doing it, and also tell them that we are having food trucks.
And maybe
'cause
we could advertise, is there anything advertised for tight lines? Maybe we could advertise,
They advertise.
Piggyback, yeah, use our resources.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so,
one more thing, if they're in town, to do,
so we'll tentatively shoot for 5:20 then,
yes.
for the.
That's the Saturday.
That in part, yeah.
Yep, and that's for the dedication of the disc golf course. Then we'll, obviously we'll invite someone from the Minger
19th
Foundation.
and 20th, been confirmed, they have it on the website. It's when tight lines are through the school.
it is the 20th, yeah, I just,
Yeah, 19 and 20, 20th.
That'd be perfect. Okay, so 5:20 is what we'll set the date for,
all right.
Perfect.
so.
Okay. Anything else, any other ideas for this summer?
I'd like to see some, we already have some resources in place with books, and I would kind of like to see some maybe types of reading or something going on at our parks to, with the library. They have to do outreach, I would imagine. So why not do an outreach at our parks and include the Owl Book, we got 2 bookstores here, Annie's and Owl Bookstore, with the library. So I was just trying to figure out a tie-in, that's one of our resources here, that maybe we could.
Those boxes, Karen, that they open up and there's a.
No, like maybe you could, okay, right now they have a
Story time in the
program,
park.
exactly, story time in the park, maybe
And then you
intergenerational.
read park stories, and you could have Yogi or someone there.
Exactly, well, exactly, right, yeah,
Or Happy Owl.
yeah.
I'm busy.
But we know that books are falling by the wayside because of all of our, our
Yeah,
technology.
That's a good idea.
So I was just thinking, the library is still here, it's awesome. I'd like to promote the library too, that helps that as well. And it also brings a different type of leisure activity to our parks.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I would like to see a little more of that. The other thing I was thinking is garden clubbing in our parks. Some kind of, I know we're talking about sustainable rain gardens, things of that sort. I would love to see some partnering with that resource as well. We have the, what's the name of that? Spirit of the Woods Garden Club. And we have other garden clubs that seem to operate kind of on their own. I would like to see a consortium of them somewhat to help us design some of these areas in our parks to be like living laboratories where you would have sustainable rain gardens and things of that stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Well, in the garden club, and there's a big one in Traverse City, and to get your master gardener, you have to do so many hours of volunteer work.
Right.
Okay,
So, if we had an idea,
great idea.
they might have people, of course, come to the funds again. So, and I guess I wouldn't, the library thing, I really like the idea. I'd be willing to go in front of their, whatever they got, and
Pitch the idea.
pitch the idea.
Oh, really?
Because they're always doing things.
Yes,
Exactly. Outreach.
And learning opportunities for different ages and
Exactly.
adults.
Yeah, I mean, that was just, we already have resources in place, so I just want to tap.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at.
I'll try to.
And it helps to energize the parks. The other thing I was thinking about is like a reintroduction of the parks. When we're kids, we're at the parks all the time. When you get older, you're not there so much. And I would like to see a little bit of us kind of reintroducing the citizenry to our park areas again, just so that they don't lose sight
yes.
of them and what they're for. And I don't know how to go about doing that, but that was something else I was kind of throwing around in my mind.
Well, we got shuffle, you gotta think of the activities we have.
Exactly.
You know,
Well, that's what, yes.
Shuffleboard with the volleyball, we have plenty. We're gonna have new basketball at Morton, so what you're saying is good.
And you know, we have transportation already in place. So if you wanted to move people around, we could actually do it that way. So you could have like a pickup area on the, let's say, the north side to do reading in the park on the south side or something along those lines. Now you don't have to worry about having transportation to get to that park to enjoy the movies, to do a reading in the park, or some other type of activity. So that was something else I have been, I see the little trolley going around. Is that from the city or is that county run?
It goes into the county.
But it runs inside the city, right?
Yes.
So I mean, that could be, so I'm thinking
Yes.
about moving people around also to our different parks to kind of like reintroduce them to our parks. So they're not just in this neighborhood. People from this neighborhood are actually coming over and enjoying that park also, making them a little more regional than they are.
That they're
Yeah.
community parks.
Exactly,
Well, here's a thought. 4th of July.
yes,
A lot of people are here.
yes,
Dial-A-Ride would sometimes do different tours.
okay.
Maybe
Oh,
Mark Fetter would be interested.
I was just thinking.
excellent.
in doing
There we go.
parks tour using Dial-A-Ride. And I don't know how you arrange all that.
Well, I'll call someone to see if we can get that through like the.
That would be awesome.
National.
But, you know, that would, out-of-towners would see it, get some history.
And you'd have to
get
keep
some
it on
funny
schedule.
stories. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yep, very good idea.
Can one more thing?
Yes.
We had talked about art drop, right? Remember, I think we had this, well, I can't say it. My next door neighbor gave me an idea about an art drop. That's where you employ an artist. We have tons of artists in the area. And what they do is they hide their artwork and they give clues to the public on where the artwork is. And the first one to find the artwork gets to keep it. It's kind of a cool idea, and I thought it would be great to engage the parks again in something of that magnitude. There is an organization and there is a date that they do the National Art Drop in September sometime. I don't think we have to work within their, their time frames, but I thought,
Might be a good month, it's warm.
exactly. The other thing, we have the school here that does artwork. We have the Ramsdale that does artwork. We have the
Started.
exactly. So we have a lot of art here that I think something like that would work also, and it would bring people to the parks. Trying to get some foot traffic through there.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Lots of ideas.
I have one idea that kept coming back to me, and it
There you
was, throw it in real quick, was some kind of a scavenger hunt,
There
stargazing
you go.
under the stars. If we could get one of the science teachers
There
from
you go.
high school or someone, if we could access a telescope and we could find the, can you
Yes.
if there are any?
Very good. Yes.
Okay, let's work on these,
Yeah,
and I think that they're good. I have one last one, was a campfire, and if Mickey would do what the campfire.
Oh, there you go.
Our kids had that, like, coming up and being, Blackbeard coming out. We went to that, in Traverse City, they had them every Thursday, and then you sat around this fire and you told a little Blackbeard story, but then the
Cool.
kids told stories that, you start a story and then everybody adds to it. When our kids were young, we never missed a Thursday. So I thought
Very
we could do
nice.
that at the beach at one of the fire pits, so. Okay, it is time. roundtable, if there's anything, otherwise we're,
Yeah, there is. The NRBC wants to collaborate and have a work session with the parks. So can we set up a time for that soon?
What is that?
do you have a date?
No, if we could, or maybe I should go back to the NRBC. They want to work with us
Oh,
to see if they can share our volunteers and to see if there's a project that we could share together. So, and I thought, should we ask the tree commission to come? Yeah,
We'll just get some dates from them,
okay.
see what the availability is up here.
Yeah, because typically they meet Monday, we meet on Mondays, but, okay.
okay, that's what, Katie said we have to adjourn after the presentation, so at this point, we can just take a break.
Okay.
Help yourself to coffee and cookies and water, so you have something to snack on before we get started. We won't start till 6.
We have 10 minutes, huh?
We got 10
We got done.
You were worried.
See,
Mark here.
more will
Yeah.
come.
And I want to welcome you and also to thank you for coming. I really appreciate everybody coming and taking the time to hear our presentation by Mark on the history of the parks. I'd like to introduce you to the members of the Parks Commission, which is a very active, hands-on commission. Kelly Greavy is vice chair. We've got Karen Patola. She came to us from the City of Detroit's park system, and so she had been employed for several years and is a real asset. Karen Mao, she was very instrumental in the planning of this and working out with Mark Fetter, so we appreciate Karen, we appreciate everybody on here. We've got Lady Ruska, she's secretary. We've got Tim O'Connor, a past chair, and we have John Veach, who was newly appointed on Tuesday, already had an engagement for tonight previously, so he is not here. Let's see. Being a parks person, a city is judged by its parks. New York City, the most populated city in our nation, has many assets. It has Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty, Broadway. But its greatest asset of all is the 843 acres of Central Park. Those New Yorkers have worked hard to preserve, to maintain, and protect that park. The current Parks Commission is no different than those New Yorkers. We are working hard to maintain, protect, and preserve the parks of Manistee. Part of preservation is knowing your history. If we don't know the history, who the benefactors were of the parks, and how they came about, and what they did for our city, we don't know too much. And so that's why we called in Mark, to prepare us and teach us and to let us know. Mark is born and raised in Manistee, graduate of Manistee High School, graduate of Central with a major in history and in film. Do I have that right?
Cinema studies.
Cinema
yeah.
studies.
It made me really employable after college. But
But he has. And
that's how I ended up here tonight.
And we are blessed for it because he replaced Steve Harold, and at that point I grew up here too, and I thought, oh, we can't have anybody more knowledgeable than Steve, and we have found an equivalent of Steve. And Steve he was a very hard act to follow, and Mark has accomplished that. Mark is very knowledgeable. He also shares his knowledge. So if you want to know the history of Manistee, but also if you live in an old house, he will share and tell you what he knows about the history. There's tables down there where you can go through and learn all the history. Plus, Mark also knows a lot about the residents of Manistee. And when I say the residents, I mean the ones are founding people. So at any time, the bathrooms are like down on the first floor. No, I'm just kidding. There's actually, so don't drink anything while you're here tonight. There's actually 2 right outside the door, and get up at any point to help yourself. There's hot chocolate, because we were thinking it would be a cold winter night, and there's hot chocolate and water and cookies, and please help yourself. You each get about 8 cookies, I think we allocated, so please feel free to get up. Mark, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, if you want to hit the old slide button there, we'll get started here. A couple things before we get started tonight. I tend to talk really fast the more excited I get, and I tend to wave my arms around a lot. But if at any time you don't understand what I'm saying because I am talking too fast, just kind of stand up or just say, Mark, kind of speak a little more distinctly, and I'd be happy to do so. Number two, I don't want to solicit too much at City Hall, but I have to ring the dinner bell for the museum. If anybody is interested in becoming a member of the museum, you would certainly help us keep the lights on. I have some membership envelopes here, and you can come and see me at the museum and talk more about that. At this point in time, we'll take whatever we can get. I will also wash your car, or power wash your house. That's also one of the things I do with my museum. I'm kidding around with that. But yes, please do if you're at all interested. We would certainly appreciate it. Three, today we're going to talk, we're not going to talk about the history behind every single park here in Manistee. There's a lot of them, but some of the histories are, well, frankly, they're a little dull. So I'm going to talk about the ones that are a little more exciting and that kind of tell not just a history of the park or that specific piece of property, but also they're good examples of actually the history of our community in general. So we're going to talk about a lot of different people tonight. You might be cross-eyed by the time you walk out of here, but there's a lot of information here. I first gave this talk about 4 years ago. We did the sesquicentennial of the city, and we had a very poor turnout. So it's nice to dust this one off and bring it back to you folks with a couple of adjustments made. So I'm very happy to be here this evening talking to you about all this stuff. So when we talk about the parks itself, we've got to keep in mind, in terms of the city, the first European white settlement arrived in Manistee in 1840, and then they settled here in 1841. But when we talk about city parks, parks at that point in time were more of a thing that was kind of out there. It was in the county, and so it wasn't exactly anything where you could just, go play ball at Reeds Park. It was in the county, places like, Nekema, that's where where the resorters were located, and then places like Orchard Beach State Park. So about the 1890s is when parks, not city parks, but county parks, or places out there were kind of put more, people brought attention to them. It was a special thing. It was a treat where you'd work all week or 6 days a week, and if you had a day off or a couple hours off, you take a train or a streetcar out to Orchard Beach or to Onekama. So it was a big deal. So it wasn't until roughly around early 1900s that you started to see the city's first park or first unofficial park. So we're going to talk half about the parks that are here today, and half about parks that used to be here but are no longer here. I always find those a lot more interesting because they're not here anymore. So we're gonna mix and match it. We should have a lot of fun. Hopefully I'll get you out of here about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we'll be all set. So before we get started, I like to use this quote whenever I give a talk. It's by a man named General Byron Cutchin. He was a University of Michigan grad. He was in the Civil War. He was a brigadier general in the Civil War. He was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. He was a teacher. He was a lawyer. A really big deal here in Manistee. He arrived in Manistee about 1867, and that's when he first started his teaching career. In 1876, this was the centennial of signing of the Declaration of Independence, and Mr. Cutchin was asked to give a big oratory address on River Street, and this we have a copy of that address at the museum, and this is always kind of a cool quote that I just like to mention, that he mentioned during that talk on July 4th, 1876. The past is a teacher of the future, and as a surveyor corrects his courses by an occasional backsight, so we as a nation and as communities may correct our errors by occasional reviews of the course we have already run. Very nicely done. I also like to quote Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, who says, history began on July 4th, 1776. Everything that happened before that was a mistake. It's good for a chuckle, good for an icebreaker, but always kind of funny to me. So anyways, the first park that we're going to talk about tonight is Pine Street Terrace. Does anybody know where Pine Street Terrace was located? We will show you. Let me get a couple notes here I have situated here. Pine Street Terrace was Steve Harold, who was, as Liz mentioned, was the former director at the museum, was my predecessor. He always said that this was the city's first unofficial park, and we can't pinpoint, I can't pinpoint, Steve couldn't, an exact date where it appeared first in the newspaper, but This is what it looks like today, not much of a park. When I say park regarding Pine Street Terrace, it's a terrace that overlooks, but this is where, I'm sure many of you know where that is today. Right at the corner of Pine and First Street, as you mentioned. You can still kind of make out the steps there a little bit today. If you kind of look a little harder up, you can kind of make it out just a little. There's that little indentation. But this was the city's first unofficial park. And so there were, benches and some flowers, and there was kind of a boardwalk that extended out there, just kind of a wooden boardwalk, and it lasted till about the 1930s or so, from what I could tell. Not much of a park, but just a place to kind of relax. A couple things I want to quickly mention. You'll notice this Civil War cannon that was brought to Manistee by August N. Johnson. This is in this photo right here, right off to your right-hand side. And then there's the caisson that goes to that cannon, located right next to the left of it over there. And this was brought to Manistee by August N. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson was the son of Nels Johnson, the big clockmaker. And he kind of was a wheeler and dealer, and he wasn't in the Civil War himself, but for some reason or another, he was able to get his hands on this cannon. So they wanted a place to put it, and in 1910, that's when they placed it right there on Pine Street Terrace. This is kind of a shot of the cannon, and then this is the caisson. And then, about 1930 or so, the cannon, this is another picture of, at the top of Pine Street Terrace, which is a really cool picture. You can see the Hotel Chippewa and these other kind of miscellaneous buildings right off to the left-hand side here. We're going to talk about a park that was located in that area, which is no longer there, but we're going to talk about that in a little while. But you get to see the cool skyline of Manistee. You get to see the Smith House, which is located right on the corner of Pine Street there. Very, very cool, but a great picture. This cannon itself was later taken out of here after Pine Street Terrace was no more, and that was sometime in the 1930s, like I said. But it ended up popping up somewhere else, which is another park we're going to talk about. That's kind of no longer in this exact spot, but is at a different spot in the community. This is where the first Douglas Park was located. And today, this cannon, this is a shot from 1963, but today this cannon sits, the same exact cannon sits in Veterans Memorial Park. That's the one that the American Legion fixed up several years ago, and they did a phenomenal job of renovating that cannon, and it's if you get a chance to go by there when it's uncovered, certainly do so. But yeah, so Pine Street Terrace, first unofficial city park, or first mention of a city park that we could find, 1890s to about 1930 or so, just kind of a cool little neighborhood hangout, and so that was the city's first park. Now, as we move forward, it's basically going to be pretty cut and dry. I'm going to say the name of a park and give you the backstory, and tell you some other side stories too. So that's just kind of how this evening is going to work out. So with that said, the next park is the first Douglas Park, which I mentioned previously. This is named after William Douglas. And William Douglas was born in Quebec in 1848, arrived in Manistee in the early 1870s. And when you think of Mr. Douglas, he's kind of a rough and tumble lumberman, kind of the definition of that. Kind of a short guy, but he did a lot of hard work. He was the guy who had a lot of calluses on his hands. He was the guy who went out and chopped all the logs along with all the other lumbermen. He laid track for the Manistee and Northeastern Railroad, which he was a partner in, and just kind of just a can-do guy, and very well regarded, very well thought of. He was partners with these two gentlemen in the Buckley and Douglas Lumber Company, and also the Manistee Northeastern Railroad, and a couple other things too. This is Mr. Buckley on the left, and this is the silent partner, Mr. Ruggles, Charles Ruggles, on the right. Mr. Douglas, as I mentioned, was a partner between these two men, and they were millionaires many times over. But Mr. Douglas was probably, I would say, the most well-regarded of the three gentlemen. He passed away in 1910, and as a way to kind of provide a tribute to his life, his widow in 1927 gave this portion of land that's located on Mason Street to the city to be used as a park. and this is his widow, Anna Douglas, kind of a cute lady. And so this is the property that they gave. It extended from, this postcard itself is really of the Chippewa Brewing Company, and this was the first brewery in the city. It was the Daniels Brewing Company, then became the Chippewa Brewing Company. But this was, the park extended basically from the Chippewa Brewing Company to the west, near which would have been at that point in time, when this picture was taken, was a Smith Street Bridge, and then became Memorial Bridge. But yes, so this is where the first Douglas Park was located. We're going to talk, this was a park for roughly 30 years, but then by the late 1950s, the city got some other notions and decided to move this park to another location, which we're going to talk about in a little while. But this was the first Douglas Park in Manistee. To kind of jump around a little bit, we're going to talk now about Fifth Avenue Beach. So when we start talking about Fifth Avenue Beach, we have to talk about a couple different things. So by the mid-19-teens, 1913, 1914, 1915, 1916, all the good lumber had been had been cut. And this is a picture of some of the former areas in the county. This is, I forget exactly in the county where this is, but this is where one of the areas where the logging camps was. And this shows all the stumps and that were left from all of the logging operations that were done in this specific area. Once again, I forget exactly what. But the good lumber was gone. This meant that the sawmills were closing up, and a lot of those lumbermen and those millionaire lumbermen who started these companies, they had passed away, and a lot of their families had moved away, and the city was losing people because there weren't any jobs available, and so it was just kind of a very dramatic time for Manistee, and I like talking about it a lot because there's a lot going on. But the main reason was all the good lumber had been cut. And so while it was decreasing, while population was decreasing, one thing throughout the community and throughout the entire world was automobiles. This was on the increase. So people were able to get around a lot more, and this really opened up travel. And so this was, if you weren't going to pertain to the tourist or the people who were in these cars traveling around, you'd be losing out on a lot of money. So what did Manistee have what's a natural resource that we have here that can make us some money? The lake, exactly. We have all this lake frontage that we could use in order to make money and bring people in the community to spend money at our hotels and boarding houses, our restaurants, our shops, so on and so forth. Basically the same thing we deal with today 100 years ago, 100 years later in Manistee. Same type of thing. But this is when it started. So this was basically this is from the 1930s, but it shows the gals in their cool bathing suits, and it's really a cool picture. And so, what could we do to bring these people, to bring this recreation to Manistee? Was to try to make one of these beaches and make one of these areas into a beach. But there was one big problem. It was this: sand. How do we get all this sand out of the area where we want to put a beach all along? And what's the best place to put a beach, or the best access to? In the city, it would be Fifth Avenue at that point in time. So this became the city's goal in 1914. And so this became the first beach, which was called the Fifth Avenue Beach Drive to the Lake. And so I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from the Manistee newspaper, the Manistee News Advocate in 1914. By April of that year, City Manager Charles E. Ruger announced to the City Commission, that a rudimentary driveway to the lakeshore was in the process of being completed. And in charge of the task was Superintendent of Streets, John Shields. Mr. Shields, much like Mickey today, you would be in charge of this today, Mickey.
I know his name's Irish. Right?
So to try to cut a path down Fifth Avenue was a very tricky thing to do because that particular area of town was surrounded by dunes, and of course, as we all know, you get a lot of hefty winds, the weather, storms, so on and so forth. And even if you try to rake that or sweep that darn sand away from the road or away from your property, it's going to come back at some point in time. It's a never-ending thing. And so what did they try to do in order to rectify this situation and try to be able to make a straight shot from all the way down Fifth Avenue to the beach is something that they would eventually figure out roughly 1 year later. So in 1915, once again from the Manistee News Advocate, the process of attempting to extend the road was not an easy one for Mr. Shields and his crew, who had to remove dozens of tree stumps, many of which were buried in the sand. In addition, heaps of sand were also taken away, and hundreds of loads of ashes that had been collected around town during the spring cleanup campaign were spread along the entire roadway in order to allow for more traction as well as to make the direct street more compact. After this was done, they were successful in 1915 in order to extend the whole Fifth Avenue the whole street from one end to the beach. They were successful in doing that, and so this would be the result of that. Oops. It became the only point of contact with the big lake in the city for motorists. So once again, if you had a car, you could buzz down Fifth Avenue and be right at the beach. And that was a big boon to the community because, as I said before, brought in tourists, brought in money. Brought in more tourists into Manistee and brought in more money. But there were a couple minor issues here that I would imagine they probably didn't think about when they were attempting to clear out the area and shape it into a beach. This is from the June 30th, 1915 issue of the Manistee News Advocate. I will read it. Attention of the police is called to bare naked bathers in the lake at the end of the Fifth Avenue Drive. One very large man was disporting himself in the water last night for the edification of motoring parties which drove down to the shore to view the beautiful sunset. He didn't allow so much as a finger ring to mar the joy of his splash. From a cursory glance, from a discreet distance, he needed the bath all right, but there are such things as proprieties in private bathtubs. It's an actual quote from the Manistee News Advocate on July 30th, 1950. So these minor issues aside, that's my little gift. These minor issues aside, Fifth Avenue Beach became a huge boon to the community. So in here, as many of us here will remember Fifth Avenue Beach as it originally was before Harbor Village was shaped in there. It was basically a straight shot Fifth Avenue, and you go right across and you end up right there in the parking lot next to the Coast Guard station, or you could turn to the right and get to Fifth Avenue. So this is what it originally looked like. This one is from the 60s, I think, but you get the idea. The road beginning at, this is from the News Advocate again, the road beginning at Washington Street and continuing to the water's edge by the Coast Guard station is finally and firmly surfaced its entire length. This is in 1915. Excuse me. For years, motorists of Manistee have longed for a good course to the lake, and this should fulfill their utmost desires in this direction. It is a public improvement which will be vastly appreciated and should prove one of the most potent arguments in Manistee's summer resort campaign. At present, the Fifth Avenue Drive is the only point of contact with the big lake in the city for motorists, and the popularity of the drive is well established. So, it's hard to imagine 100 years ago exactly what, over 100 years ago, what that meant to the community as jobs were leaving, as things were kind of in a real transition mood. This is when the first big push for tourism kind of came to Manistee. How does the city reinvent itself? And this is kind of how one of the aspects they had in reinventing itself. But also became much loved for years and years and years, and to the current day, a much loved park and a much loved area for the community and visitors alike. We're going to talk now about First Street Beach, and some of these points that I talked about with Fifth Avenue are going to pop up again here, because this happens roughly 4 to 5 years after Fifth Avenue Beach became a thing. They were looking for another way down to the beach. So once again, by the mid-19 teens, good timber had been cut, population decreases, mills were discontinued. Once again, how do we reinvent ourselves to be like this picture? And once again, what the heck do we do with all this sand? Here's this slide again. As I talked about Fifth Avenue, the north side in the Fifth Avenue area with all the sand, you also had a very similar problem along First Street, because you had a big sand dune there, kind of in the way by Tamarack Street as it crosses First Street, and around that vicinity called Creeping Joe is what they nicknamed it. And not just with the sand, but what do we do about this old sawmill that's sitting here? And this, in the First Street Beach area today, is where the Canfield and Wheeler sawmill and salt block was located. So you had, in addition to that, you also had in that area where the big, what we refer to today as the Polish settlement. So you had a lot of the Polish families in these settled there in these shacky houses, and kind of an eyesore by the time the mill has been discontinued. All this stuff was still sitting there, standing there. What do we do with all this stuff in order to beautify the area? Now, at this point in time in Manistee's history, by the teens, and this really continues on into the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even until today, beautification really becomes a thing at this point in time by the teens, but continues on to today. So if we want to have visitors come here and locals enjoy this area along the lakeshore, well, what do we do with all these problems? So once again, they took Creeping Joe down, they excavated it, they were able to take out the sand dune so it would no longer be a problem, so people could actually drive from one end of First Street to the next without there being any impediments. So they got rid of the sand dune. Likewise, they did the same thing with the sawmill and the salt block. They burned some buildings, they tore them apart, and were able to clear the area of any unsightly ancient industrial buildings in order to make that area nice. And so this is another headline from the News Advocate. The need of a road to the lake certainly has been indicated during the last summer. This would be 1919. Scores of tourists inquired how to reach the lake. They expressed surprise when informed that the Fifth Avenue Road was the only communication. So I don't really understand this, because if you already have one road, what do you need another one for? But apparently they wanted to, people were asking about wanting to get down to the beach a different way. They didn't want to go down Fifth Avenue. So they have something against the north side, I don't know, but that was the only way to go down there. And I would imagine at that point in time, there was probably a lot of traffic going in and around there. So what's another way in order to get down to the beach? So First Street would end up being the way. Once again, a few more quotes here. The resort business and its attendant tourist travel is becoming one of the big features of Manistee. Thousands of visitors come here every year. Most visitors to the city inquire to the most direct route to Lake Michigan. The Fifth Avenue route is out of the way. There you have it. The city's proximity to Lake Michigan is to be one of the inducements in resort propaganda. One more question remained after they cleared the sand and the salt block and the sawmill. What do we do about this railroad grade that's in the way? You'll see First Street coming down over here. You'll see the waterworks building over here. You'll see this railroad grade that was kind of in the way if you were going straight down to First Street. So what do we do about this railroad grade, which was owned by the Manistee and Grand Rapids Railroad? Manistee East and West Railroad. So the city eventually got the right of way from the railroad in order to tear, I think they tore up the tracks and then they moved them. So it wouldn't be quite in the way as it was. I think they moved them a little bit further down if memory serves right. So by the spring of 1920, Tarvia stone paved road from Elm Street all the way, the corner of Elm Street along First, all the way to Lake Michigan, and this is kind of what it looked like. This is kind of a Cherry Road would be, to my knowledge, Cherry Road would be over here off to the right, and there was a little bit of a hill that up that over there, but this is what it looked like. Very cool. So you have by 1920 two city beaches that are attracting more and more people to Manistee, and that's kind of how they were first started, or how they first began to be the parks that they are today. A couple minutes ago, I talked about the first Douglas Park. I should say this, by late July 1920, one of the best and biggest public improvements made in Manistee in a long time. It opens up an avenue to the lake on the south side of the river, as well as makes possible general use of a beach that in a number of particulars is even better than the famous Fifth Avenue beach. That's late July of 1920. So very cool how all that started. We're going to talk a little bit about the second Douglas Park now. I talked about the first Douglas Park and how that was located along Mason Street. And we're going to go and talk, say a few words about the second Douglas Park. So Douglas Park moved to First Street Beach in 1958. Why? One of the reasons why is because it was seldom used. According to the newspaper, it was a very seldom used park. I guess from what I could tell, they had people observe it, and there weren't like any picnics or any people for a period of time, and so I think that's how they came up with the seldom used part, from what I've read. So it was seldom used according to the newspaper, according to the city. At this point in time, this large parcel of land was being looked at by three local firms. One was Morton Salt, one was the Ironworks, and I forget the third one. But there were three firms involved. And the city, they said that, or the city was looking to work a deal out with these firms for $700 for use of a part of this land. So what they did is that they looked at about a third of this land to be used as a right-of-way for a waste disposal pipeline to the Manistee River. This was a little bit before all the environmental concerns were put into place, as you can probably guess. But so what the city did is they wanted to sell a third of this land to this joint venture of the three firms for $700 so they could put a waste disposal pipeline on it. The American Legion was also looking at that point in time to find a new home, and so they sold a third of this land to the American Legion. And then the remaining portion was retained by the city. So with these three things, these three interests in place, the first thing that, and them wanting to sell it and to get rid of it, they had to contact the heirs of Mr. and Mrs. Douglas. And according to the newspaper, this was a little bit tricky because they didn't have any children. Their heirs were not in the area, but they eventually found a distant, a long-lost nephew of Mr. and Mrs. Douglas, and he gave his okay to sell off the property. But in order to keep the Douglas name alive, so to speak, to perpetuate the Douglas name, the city had to find a new home for Douglas Park. And that's how it ended up from where it is today at First Street Beach. So that's not the first Douglas Park, that's the second Douglas Park. And so that's kind of how Douglas Park kind of came to be. Are there any questions so far while I'm getting into all this stuff here? Because we're going to jump around a little bit more. Go ahead, sir.
So Douglas Park, was it just the beach or the parking lot or where the hotel is?
That's always kind of a tricky question for me. I believe it's that whole vicinity. Yeah, is it? Is it it's the parking lot, the whole kit and caboodle there?
Oh, that's even a pier. It's like, I think it's 74 acres is what we counted as.
That's
But it's parking lot, the marina
There's a lot, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So it is sizably bigger than the first Douglas Park. So maybe a better tribute to Mr. Douglas. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these other people who were a part, whose names are still alive in the community because the parks are named after them. All right, we're going to continue on. The next one we're going to talk about is just one of those people, and it's going to be Duffy Park. Of course, neighborhood street located off of kind of the Monroe Street area, and just kind of right about here. We all know kind of where it's located with the basketball courts, where they are now, and the baseball diamond and the city street and so on and so forth. So this is on the north side, and this is Duffy Park. This is Thomas Duffy. This is not actually Thomas Duffy, but I don't have a picture of him at the museum. And gosh, you know, when I was refreshing this whole talk, I was watching an episode. I seriously was watching an episode of Three's Company, and I said, Mr. Roper is going to be my Thomas Duffy. We're visual people. I like to have an idea of what these people kind of look like, so I visualize Thomas Duffy as looking like Norman Fell from Three's Company. So when we talk about him, that's who we picture. Mr. Duffy was born in 1815 in England, and he came to Manistee in the mid-1850s. And settled here to become not just a millwright, but a carpenter. And he had a pretty sizable family. I think there was at least 6 children in his immediate family. And they lived on the north side. They settled on the north side. And of course, this is taken from an old map. This is kind of the vicinity of where that park is today, kind of in the shaded area there. So from the headline. So, Mr. Duffy lived on the north side in the vicinity of what is now named Duffy Street, but he kind of met a grisly end. The body of Thomas Duffy was found drowned in the boom of Green and Milmo on Tuesday. That was a sawmill. He was quite an aged man, a carpenter by trade, and has lived here several years. He leaves a wife and family. This was his entire obituary. Not much else can be found out about what happened here, or they don't describe who his exact survivors were. These 3 sentences are his obituary. That was published in the Manistee Times on June 24th, 1871. I could not find the exact date that it was that it became known as, that area became known as Duffy Park. But because I would assume that because the street was named after Mr. Duffy, that they decided to name Duffy Park after him as well. But today used as a park and primarily a baseball field. Reconfigured once the housing development was put in. When I was a kid and growing up in Manistee, it was always the basketball court. It was a very popular place, and the basketball court was located kind of where the housing development was put up about 20 years or so ago. So when everybody wanted to play basketball, it was always, do you want to play at Duffy? Do you want to play at Duffy? And so that was kind of where we all played basketball. I won't launch into my basketball career. It's not very pleasant. But so that's what Duffy Park is named after. Thomas Duffy, who was from England and met a very grisly end here in Manistee, but was a very well-known millwright and carpenter. Once again, some of these stories have a lot to it, and some of these simply don't, but it's pretty basic. Retchamaret Park, also located on the north side, right over here. Everyone kind of knows where that's located. It was named after a man named John Red Chamark, born in 1925 in Manistee, and he worked for the city. He was later employed by the city, and in 1956, John Red Chamark, a 32-year-old city employee, was named, who has been a friend of Manistee youth for many years, was named Manistee's Outstanding Citizen by the VFW Selection Committee. He was recognized as a very tireless worker, and especially catering toward once again the youth of the city, and was very well liked by everybody, like Mickey is today. But he went the extra mile, and it certainly showed. when he was named Outstanding Citizen in 1956, his selection was in recognition of his many endeavors as a tireless worker in maintaining excellent softball and baseball diamonds at Sands Park and Reeds Park, and often working late at night to ensure the ice rink at Sands Park is available for children for the coming day, oftentimes at his own personal plans. Very tireless city worker. Also supervised the game room at the Civic Center and spearheaded various projects to obtain benefits for youth at the Civic Center. Specifically, in 1956, a TV set and new lighting for the game room. So there he is, putting some water for the skating rink. Sadly, he passed away at the age of 42 in 1967. And just a couple months later, the city decided to take the park, which they had named Fifth Avenue Park, and rededicated it as Red Chamarg Park. And so that's how Red Chamarg Park came to be and why it's called Red Chamarg Park. But I'm not exactly sure why they called him Red. I don't know what the nickname implied. Did he have red hair? There you go. Red Chamarg. You can't tell from the black and white photo in Bandolap that he had red hair. So I appreciate that. So yes, that's how Mr. Chamarg came to be. Red Chamarg Park came to be. I don't have a lot of cool old pictures of Mack Park. It's one of more of the recent parks in the last 40 years or so. So I'm just going to quickly run down why it's named Mack Park. I'm sure a lot of you probably know this, but we'll just give you the basics of this one here, and this is where it's located here. I'd often call it Manistee's Forgotten Park because it's kind of tucked away in that neighborhood, and people don't really know it's there. Located on the corner of 14th and Greenwich Streets. And on June 27th, 1960, this area was platted as Golden Acres Subdivision. In 1981, it was named after City Councilman Robert Mack. The newly developed park was officially named Robert Mack Park on November 4th, 1981. And once again, I think it's kind of one of those forgotten ones, just because it's just kind of off up there and off to the side, but kind of a neat place, though. Tucked away. But Mack Park, named after Mr. Mack. This is kind of where it starts to get a lot of there's a lot of moving parts to Reeds Park, but I'll do my best to attempt to explain it all. Before I do that, I'd like to get a little sip of water. Are there any questions before I move on with any of this other stuff? All right.
Where exactly is Mack Park? I don't know where that is.
I'll get the map up for you there, Jane. You can kind of here's Cornell Street right up over here, and see that M off to the side? That's where the Manistee Catholic Central football stadium is, and just basically right up above there and to the south. All right, Reeds Park. We're going to talk about Mr. Reeds, and he's kind of a cool guy. Mr. Reeds was born in Germany in 1824, and he came to the United States in 1849. He at first settled in the Chicago area, and then, along with his three brothers, embarked on this lumbering business, which they, after arriving in Manistee in 1867, named Charles Reeds Brothers, I think is what it was called. Very descriptive. They were located primarily in the area where Oak Hill is, right below the hill. That's where the lumbering business the sawmill was set up. He purchased it and set up a very lucrative, what would end up being a very lucrative business. Kind of a shrewd businessman, but very well regarded in the city.
Is that where Tandu is, or is that?
Tandu. This is up from Tandu. This is basically kind of where Reith Riley is located. Yeah, kind of within that vicinity there. This is a picture of Mr. Reetz's mill. He lived in 1874. He had this huge mansion built for him, and I will quote from one of the newspapers. In 1874, Reitz had a large. No, this was another article written about the Reitz mansion. In 1874, Reitz had a large mansion constructed on a hilltop, present-day Oak Hill, that overlooked one of his sawmills. The mansion, described as a palatial, elegant home, included numerous acres of land in which Reitz had one of the best privately owned gardens and parks in the city. Whenever I started at the museum about 14, 15 years ago, and whenever I came across this picture, it always reminded me of the Bates Motel, just because from the movie Psycho, for those who don't know the reference, but it always looks dilapidated and kind of creepy, and the picture of the house was, of course, a latter-day picture, I think roughly around the time that it was going to be torn down, but for some reason it always reminded me of Bates Motel. And that was located right atop the area in the vicinity of where Reitz Park Apartments are now. There were, as I mentioned, they talked about this whole area overlooking his sawmill, and included numerous acres of land. It was there, and I don't have it included in here, but at the museum we have a wider shot of this, and you see the house sitting all the way atop the hill, and then you just see all these acres of land, and it kind of looks real lonely up there. But yeah, that's where it was located. In 1881, Mr. Reitz was the first man who the discovery of salt is attributed to. It's a kind of a long, drawn-out story. I'll do my best to give you the quick lowdown. But Mr. Reitz got the idea that there was salt bubbling up from some of the areas of where his sawmill was located. Within the vicinity of the land, he noticed that he believed it to be salt springs, and so he basically invited other area lumbermen to pool their money together to hire a geologist to do some drilling. And after a period of time, it started about 1879, after a period of time, the other lumbermen slowly took their money out of the pot because they believed he was wrong. But he kept going for a little while longer, and eventually, long story short, he discovered salt. And so, I should say he discovered brine. So what they did is they pumped down water and steam. They discovered salt. They pumped down water and steam, and using a well, they pumped up brine. Would take that brine, evaporate it, and then get the salt. Well, after he discovered it, sure enough, all the other lumbermen said, "Well, let me try that around my property," and most of them eventually struck salt as well. That's the short story. So most of the lumber companies later on became lumber and salt companies. And so that essentially did two things. One, it made them richer. Two, it brought more people to Manistee. So Manistee's population increased greatly after 1880. So that by around 1890, 1895, you see a city that has a population of roughly around 15,000 people, give or take a few. So salt was the main thing, that's the primary thing that we attributed to Mr. Reitz and his foresight and his determination. So Mr. Reitz passed away in 1890, and this left his mansion to be, and the surrounding grounds to become very dilapidated. The sawmill and the salt block would continue on. It would be later owned by Louis Sands, and that later discontinued. But after Mr. Reitz passed away, the house would eventually become dilapidated. And so by 1890, after he passes away, let me see, what do I got here? All right, the next sheet here. So what do we as the grounds that included all these, like I said, vineyards and beautiful landscapes and so on and so forth, fell into the state of disrepair. His family, he had a daughter, at least one daughter living here in Manistee, who was married to a well-known lawyer named Charles Dovell. They decided to figure out a way in which the city could begin to own the property and use it as a park. So this happens, the wheels start moving on this in 1908, and there's a couple different factions that are involved in this. The Lakeside Club plays a part in this. Of course, the city, the descendants of Mr. Reitz, and a man named J. Pomeroy Munson of Grand Rapids. He was a well-known landscape artist, and he was hired to come up with these plans. These are his exact plans that I scanned, and to come up with these plans and figure out a way to make Reitz Park into a really grand, really cool park. Not just a regular, not just Pine Street Terrace or Douglas Park on Mason Street, but just a really unique, cool park. And so.
Is that circular area where the hardscape is, the stones and the?
Yes, yeah, and that's still there, and I'm going to show you some pictures of that here in a second of what that looked like. But yes, so Mr. Munson was hired in 1908 in order to cultivate this into a very unique park. This is a quick description of Mr. Reitz's area prior to the park. I should have read this a couple minutes ago, but I'll read it to you. This gives you an idea of what that whole area would look like. His grounds are beautifully located on the high table overlooking Manistee Lake and the city, and embrace about 20 acres under cultivation. The soil is sandy and as light as any in the county. Yet through cultivation and irrigation, he has realized most bountiful products of all kinds of garden and field vegetables. He has a large field in grapes of the very best variety, and every vine is growing luxuriously. Okay? It is safe to say that in quantity and quality, his grapery is unrivaled in northern Michigan. And on the south of his cultivated fields and near his park would be a small park, which he called Reitz Park, that is fast becoming the rival of the best park in the land. So there was already a little something there, but when Mr. Munson was hired, it would be the entire grounds of or most of the entire grounds that Reitz had. So in 1908, like I said, this started to get moving, and then this is kind of what was figured out with it. This is part of what Mr. Munson had designed for inclusion in the park. This is the pavilion. And all this came to fruition, and it was later dedicated in 1910, about 2 years after it was first planned. But this is a pavilion, really a cool building there on land. And this is part of the fountain and a wading pool that's there today. You see the pavilion right there in the background. And this is another, and that is there today, as Jane said. It's there today. I don't know how many of you actually frequent Reitz Park. My grandma used to live on Forest Avenue, so we used to go over there a lot as kids. It looks pretty shabby today, and nothing like this. You know, it's very well kept up, but it's nothing like it used to be. And of course, another shot of it too. Now, for many years, this park was the de facto park in Manistee. It had the most amount of traffic year-round. It was the park. It was the place to be. And that was mainly why, the main reason why that was, is because the old highway used to go right straight along it. Main Street, which I outlined there in yellow, is a portion of US 31 from the the mid-1920s to the mid-1950s. So this was a portion. This was the highway, and so with people coming and going there, they would park their cars, rest, relax. There were cabins, little small cabins in the area of what is now the Housing Commission and the Reitz Park Apartments. So it was a very well-regarded area. And so that, once again, was dedicated in 1910 and continues on until today. And Mr. Reitz, he equals salt. Continuing on with these people these lumbermen and the parks that we continue to use today, we're going to continue on, and we're going to talk about Mr. Sands, and we'll give you a quick rundown on Mr. Sands. Louis Sands, born in Sweden in 1826, he was 6'4" tall, and he was often referred to as the Big Swede, but a very well-regarded individual, and his reputation as a very well-regarded individual only continued to grow once he got into the lumber and salt business. He's kind of at the top tier guys when we talk about the local lumbermen and salt guys. He was at the top. He was one of the most wealthy of the individuals, and he had his hands on a lot of different things, but one of the most well-regarded lumbermen here in Manistee. Short story, the fourth generation of the Sands family continues to reside here in Manistee County not on a year-long basis, but they have summer homes here. Are very good friends of the museum, and have continued to help us out with several projects, and always have shared some neat stories and artifacts from their family too. So very, very nice people. So Mr. Sands came here to Manistee in 1853 and got his start working in a couple of the mills. Was able to save some money and eventually invested in his own mill, and continued on through the early 19 teens. Regardless of all that. This is his house. Was located right on the corner of 5th and Oak Street. It was torn down in the 1920s and continued. The brick was reused to build 4 homes that are still there today. 3 on 5th and 1 on Oak. But that's what the house looked like. If you're looking right on that corner now, straight across, that's what it used to look like. So, a very palatial home. He also brought gas, light, and electricity to Manistee, and he didn't. For several months, he didn't charge anything for it. He didn't charge the city for it, but he wanted to give this as a donation to the city. But he's the one who brought gas and then later electric lighting to Manistee too. He passed away in August 1905. A part of the land that his family owned was located on 8th Street and Maple Street, and the heirs of the Sands estate would eventually give to the city in 1914 this acreage to be used as a park, to be known as Sands Park. But a little bit prior to it being a very well manicured park, it was basically just I don't think I have it included in here, but just a field with wooden fence posts surrounding it. That was pretty much all it. So it was kind of an ugly looking, not very attractive looking park or area for many years. And this is the vicinity of where it was located right here. This was the whole Sands Park area. That whole chunk there. But to kind of go off on just a side tangent, a lot of the time, naming something after someone equals immortality. We all know this. We talked about a couple of these people. We talked about Mr. Reitz Park. We talked about Mr. Douglas Park. We talked about Mr. Sands. We're talking about Mr. Sands Park. And we even talked about Mr. Duffy Park. It's not rocket science, but this means that your name will presumably always be used in the community. And when you think about it, 100 years later, over 100 years later, we're still using these parks. We're still referencing the names of these people. We've kept their names alive. As a kid playing in Reitz Park, I would ask my granny, why is it called Reitz Park? Well, I think it was some guy who had something to do with salt. I remember her saying. Well, these questions, these are questions that we ask ourselves as we continue to live in this community. Who are these people, and what role did they play in the community? And their names are still being used to this day. So that's immortality. Hopefully, they continue to still be used. But just a side note, continuing on with Mr. Sands, in March of 1925, the City Commission transferred the portion of land over to the school. They had to get the okay from the Sands family. From what I've read about in the newspaper, it was kind of a tricky thing. There were some hard feelings with the Sands estate, so on and so forth. So it was kind of a difficult thing, and I won't launch too much into that. But they wanted to build, of course, as we know, which is no longer there, a new high school, and so this is kind of when the wheels started to come to be in motion. So the city transferred a portion of that Sands estate, that Sands Park, to the school system. And if we go back just a little bit, you can see how once again how big that Sands Park area originally was. It took up that whole big swath of land over there. And of course, there's the old high school. And that was dedicated in April of 1927. In 1951, there was a call for a joint city-school operation for athletic and recreational purposes. And so this is what took place in the 1950s, is that the land began, the land started to be used more and more by the school, because it was located right there. So the school decided to join with the city to run Sands Park. And so that's why we still have Sands Park today. And we got a couple more here. We're running pretty good on time. Are there any questions before I move along to Veterans Memorial Drive? Go ahead, Jane.
On the south side, I had mentioned to you once about when I was like a toddler, fraternity Lutheran churches right now, we call that Peters Park.
We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. Yeah. We gotta get through Veterans Memorial Park first. So, circa 1930s, we all know, most of us probably know what happened in the United States as a result of the stock market crash in 1929. It was the Great Depression. And so, during the Great Depression, of course, this is kind of just a rudimentary history lesson. The Roosevelt administration decided to come up with these different programs called which he called the New Deal. And so there was the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and on and on and on and on and on and on it goes, to attempt to put people back to work, to make an influx of a difference in the communities across America, and to try to get people kind of back on their feet again. But as I mentioned earlier too, that period was still a time of beautification. Let's continue to beautify Manistee. Let's continue to clean up all this junk that's laying around along the riverbanks. And so this is kind of what Veterans Park would eventually, what would eventually lead to Veterans Park. But these New Deal programs, just within Manistee County, resulted in several different things. Believe it or not, this is a picture of M55. M55 was a part of that, the New Deal program. They built M55 to what we know, would eventually come to know today. The Cooley Bridge along M55, this was also a part of of a WPA program, which put people to work. That was also a part of that. The former Washington School was also a part of that, which was dedicated in 1936, but that was also done through the New Deal programs, the WPA. And also the former Michigan State Police Post on Arthur Street, that was also a part of that too. And the list goes on and on and on and on. These are just a couple of examples. So you have Let's Continue to Beautify coupled with the Great Depression, and this would result in what would at that point be called Riverside Park. And this is the plans for Riverside Park, which would become Memorial Drive. But a lot of their some of their plans didn't exactly turn out the way that they initially hoped for. There's still this parking lot up over here. There's some other items here. I forget exactly some of these buildings. I think they were like a restroom or some other park area. Never really quite came to fruition, but in the late 1930s, this is kind of when this plan was put into place. Another thing that Riverside Park would do would be to actually connect both bridges. Prior to that, if you wanted to, this whole area was just fields and sand. You wouldn't be able to swing from one bridge to the other. Kind of like we do today when Maple Street Bridge is up and we go, if I bust myself straight through Memorial Drive, maybe the bridge won't be up, and I'll be able to get lucky. But then every now and again, there's that time where you're like, that one's up too, and I'm running late to get down to the museum, and there's gonna be hundreds of people waiting for me. Which is usually not the case. But Riverside Park was all these things. It was beautification. It was continue to put people to work, and also connection. It connected two ends of the city to each other. And this is kind of what it looked like when it's not a very good picture because it was scanned from the newspaper, but this is kind of what it looked like as they were mowing down the sand and the fields and the grass and everything. And they actually started this at the end of January in 19. Not the greatest time to do this, but there were a lot of different moving parts to the organization of this, which I won't launch into. This building in the back here, this is the Manistee Manufacturing Company, and then off here to the left-hand side is Maple Street Bridge. So work began in this in the early part of 1940, but momentum slowed by 1941, and that was largely due to what we expected to go into would be another world war. So a lot of these guys who were working with through these New Deal programs, they were eventually drafted. That kind of started there in early mid 1941. So there weren't enough men to continue to work these jobs. So momentum continued to slow as time went on and the year went on. So basically, from 1941 to 1946, 5 years almost, the project was not completed. It stood at a standstill. The road was carved, but it was all dirt. And kind of like how it seemed over the last maybe 20 years there. I'm sorry, I gotta get something in there, but it was in pretty bad shape. But it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful now. I think it's phenomenal now. But it basically stood there. There were curb and gutter work put in. Some of the accoutrements were put in, but their plans weren't fully realized. So for about 5 years or so, it stood at a standstill. And so after the war, they decided to scuttle the rest of the plans that they initially had for this and not continue on with it. And they decided to rename the park, not Riverside Park, but Memorial Drive. And so this became a memorial to all the soldiers who passed away in Manistee County. And so there were hemlock trees planted supposedly for each soldier that passed away originally, and those eventually became, you can see all the trees kind of dotting Memorial Park there. So in 1946 is when they dedicated it as Memorial Drive, but it wasn't until 2 years that it was officially paved. So they waited about 2 more years for it to be paved, so about 7 years or so, but by the time they stopped construction on it, until it was paved as Memorial Drive in 1948. Once again, this photo is an aerial photo taken from 1963. There are a couple dead giveaways here. The bridge right there, there's Memorial Bridge over here. Maple Street Bridge is being constructed as the bridge we know it today. This area here is where Olson's was. It was built as Kroger's originally, as Kroger's new store, and so that's being constructed right over here. So there's a lot of cool things you can analyze in this photo. But in 1948 is when Veterans Memorial Park and Memorial Drive was officially paved and became a cool aspect of our city, and that connection was finally made. Here's kind of one of the more little-known parks, and I briefly mentioned this too, probably about 4 hours ago. Is a place called Chippewa Park, and this was primarily named after the Hotel Chippewa, which was located on the corner of Pine and Water Streets. This is an 1888 picture of the former Hotel Chippewa, which was originally called the Dunham House. Now, this was the premier hotel in Manistee. This was built in 1878, if I remember correctly, but it was, as you can see from this photo, only 10 years old, the premier hotel in Manistee. It was very well regarded, very well thought of. But something happened in 1917. Well, I should say a little bit prior to that. In the early 19-teens, a new hotel was opened up, and it was called the Manistee Bath and Salt Company, and it was located where the Briney Building is now. And that became Manistee's premier hotel because it offered medicinal salt baths, and a lot more people flocked there. And so and at that point in time, as population was kind of decreasing in Manistee, and not as many people were working or had moved away, so on and so forth, this building, the business had fallen on hard times, and this building became vacant. It was closed up. But then, just a couple years later, in 1917, if I remember correctly, there was a large fire in the in that building, the Manistee Salt and Bath Company, and that building went up in flames and was destroyed. But Manistee still needed a really nice hotel, so a group was formed, and they set up the Hotel Chippewa, and that's what they renamed this building. They renovated it, and it became known as the Hotel Chippewa, and later under a couple other names, most notably Coral Gables, until it closed in 1979. There was this little park right on the side here that I find mentioned a couple times in the newspaper, and they refer to it as Chippewa Park. It's just one of those out-of-the-way, small little places, not officially a city park, but just kind of one of those cool little areas that I just like to mention. This is Pine Street right here, going up and down, and then, of course, going left and right is First Street. This was just below the hill of where Pine Street Terrace was located. Just a cool little neighborhood park that was very well manicured. Had lawn furniture. Other pictures show lawn furniture, trellises, flowers. Once again, not an official city park, but referred to a lot in the newspaper. Just a and there's what it looks like somewhat today. This was what it looked like about 4 years ago. So, but just kind of a cool little area there. Chippewa Park, named after the Hotel Chippewa. Kind of neat. Jane, now's your time. Now's the time. Peters Park. Once again, as I mentioned before about Sands Park and Reeds Park and Thomas Duffy Park and Douglas Park, we've got Peters Park. Once again, not an official true city park, but just one of those neighborhood parks that beautified the area. And this was located where Trinity Lutheran Church and School is currently located, right smack dab in the middle there. Here's a picture of Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters was a really interesting gentleman. He was a millionaire at least two times over. He lost his millions once, and then he gained it all back again. He was responsible for the building that was sitting in the property where we're standing now. It was originally the Women's Christian Temperance Union Hall. He built it for his wife because she was the head of the organization. And about 3 months after it was built, it burned to the ground. And then a short time later, he vowed that he would rebuild it, and he did. He kind of had a lot of luck. He was a really interesting gentleman. I believe he lived, other than Charles Ruggles, he lived the longest out of all the old millionaires, but was a really interesting fellow. Anywho, this was his house here, and this was located in that vicinity where Trinity Lutheran Church and Trinity Lutheran School is today. This was the Peters residence. But after Mr. Peters passed away, the area became vacant and very, as they refer to in the newspaper, like a big jungle. with all these overgrown trees and lawn and weeds and vines and so on and so forth. Was a very unattractive area. In the spring of 1941, this group got together, and they were the Civic Betterment Committee. And that was organized in the spring of '49, and they were made up of 3 different local women's groups. One was the Lakeside Club, one was the Junior Lakeside Club, and the third was the Business and Professional Women's Club. So, you know, they joined hands and formed the Civic Betterment Committee. Seems kind of complicated to me, but hey, whatever works, I guess. But they had it in their heads that they wanted to get that area looking nice. So they enlisted help from a wide swath of people. The Northside Improvement Association, who was very responsible for decades in keeping the Fifth Avenue Beach area and the North Side looking really nice. The Junior Chamber of Commerce, the Spirit of the Woods Garden Club, the VFW, the Elks, and the list really goes on and on and on. So they asked these people, probably several of their husbands too, and family members to help out in making this park look nice. Once again, not an official city park, but they worked this strange deal out, and it would take me a while to explain it all, and I won't get into it, but they worked this deal out with the State Conservation Department. And so, roundabout sort of way, this is kind of how it worked. On June 15th, 1954, City Commission approved the sale of the property by the State Conservation Department to Trinity Lutheran Church for this is going a little bit further. But the park became a very well-known neighborhood park and continued on for many years. I've heard people tell me stories of how it used to be. They used to walk through there on their way to school and kind of cut through Peters Park. But I've also heard that it was kind of it was very jungle-like from what I've heard. It was very lots of greenery there, I guess, from what do you remember it, Jane?
Well, I remember trees that had fallen.
Yes, yeah, I've heard that same thing. Yeah. So it wasn't very well kept up. Wasn't very well maintained. So with all this in mind, from 1949 to 1954, Peters Park was kind of looking as a site. Peters Park was looking for the site as a site for a new Trinity Lutheran Church and School, which was prior to this located on First Street, near Cypress Street. And so they were looking for a new home for the church and school, and on June 15th, 1954, the City Commission approved the sale of the property by the State Conservation Department to Trinity Lutheran Church for just $1. Deeded on August 4th and consecrated on September 19th. Church dedicated in 1957. This is when the property was consecrated. Here's what Peters Park looked like. this path here and these giant trees, and here's probably half the congregation of Trinity Lutheran Church out there. It really looked like in the middle of nowhere within the city of Manistee. But that was named that park, once again, not an official city park, but just kind of a side note. But by mentioning these parks that were not really an official city park, I always think it provides context into, there were just these little nooks and crannies that had this little area within the city that was beautified, and people worked together in order to get it done, much like the Parks Commission does now, to try to beautify the area and make it look nice for the neighborhoods. And so I'd like to mention Peters Park when I'm talking about city parks in general. 2 more to go, guys, I think. Ready Park. This is another one of those parks that has disappeared over the years. And as I mentioned previously, this was by the teens, and at this point in time when the city's trying to be kind of in a transition, you start to see there be a big call for beautification. And one of the areas that there always was a big call for was along the riverbanks. And so this is a shot taken on the north side, kind of where Veterans Memorial Park is today, looking to the south side looking to the south along where the Riverwalk is today. So this big building here on the end right here, this is where Glicks is located today. And this is Maple Street Bridge right here. This is the Manistee Manufacturing Company. where the brewery is today. So this just gives you an idea of what this area kind of looked like in its heyday. You had train tracks and all this, some other junk here and these logs, and it just looked pretty bad. Across the river you had these boathouses, and it just looked pretty bad as time continued on. And as a lot of that lumber disappeared. So it was in really poor shape, and the call for beautification was certainly a just one.
So did Veterans Park take over that?
Yeah, that would eventually become a Veterans Park after the folks from the WPA worked on it and kind of leveled it out and kind of shaped it into what it is today. But of course, yeah, so the call for beautification continued on and on and on and still continues on today. But yeah, this is where that was located. There came a man who was a Polish doctor in Manistee, and his name was, I won't pronounce it right, but his name was Dr. Szydorski. And he owned, or I shouldn't say owned, he was an occupant of the building at 356 River Street. Today, that's where the Farm Bureau Insurance Agency is located, where Matt Kaznacki is located. And so in that building up above, he had his residence and his doctor's offices. And then below was the Consumers Energy. And that's where Consumers Energy Consumers Energy was located for several years. But with this call of beautification, the good doctor decided to kind of form a little park for, kind of do his own little beautification project. And so that's what he did. And he made what was referred to for several years as Ready Park. This is located in the back of these buildings right over here in this vicinity along today's Riverwalk. You see this kind of cool mushroom tree right here, and there's these yachts, and it's all well manicured. And it was named after Ready Kilowatt. Ready Kilowatt was the mascot for Consumers Energy. And the electric company. And so he named it Ready Park. And this is kind of another view, just a little bit, you see the mushroom tree right here, you see the well-manicured shrubbery, and these happening people here on this yacht. So it was a very high point for beautification for many years. Let's see, what else do I got here? Decided to construct a riverfront park so people who could walk down and check it out, and there were some benches there, and then people could dock or people could dock their boat and enjoy that area to make it look like a bright spot within the city. I don't know when that ceased to be a thing, but was there for at least 20 years or so. So Ready Park. This is what he was quoted as in the newspaper. I invite garden lovers, flower lovers, and other kinds of lovers to visit my garden. I raise no different flowers for my enemies that I raise for my friends, and all are equally welcome. Visitors will see here Michigan's colors displayed in their true manner. And that was the good doctor there. So Ready Park, right along today's Riverwalk. And last but not least, the Manistee Municipal Marina. How did this all come to be? Well, it started with a group, and I know many of you might be familiar with the group, the Tuesday Committee. And they were a group of industrial leaders here in Manistee who decided to kind of put their heads together to come up with a way to combat what people refer to Manistee as, are you ready for it? A grubby town. At that point in time, there were there were some vacant storefronts. Some of the buildings weren't cleaned or painted, and so one of them, the president of the Tuesday Committee, or the main spokesperson, mentioned, and he heard in passing that Manistee was referred to as a grubby town. And his name is Jack Barstow, the district manager for Consumers Power, and he asked this simple question in a Grand Rapids Press article on the Tuesday Committee. How could local industry expect people to come to Manistee to work, or how could new businesses and industries be expected to locate here with the community looking the way it did? Good question. So, what happened? Urban renewal. We're gonna clean. We're gonna plant trees. We're gonna paint. And we're also gonna tear down buildings too. So this is essentially what they did. They had a lot. They kind of got a lot of volunteers together from the Manistee JCs, different men's groups, women's groups, and they all kind of worked together, kind of like a big day of serving is today. But they painted buildings and they beautified the area. This was all urban renewal, which was beautification, which was a part of the urban renewal plan. This group's urban renewal plan. By 1967, though, when I mentioned they knocked down some buildings, directly across from where the museum is located today, this is a Sanborn map, insurance map of the city. This is River Street. The museum is located right here at 425, 427. Directly across, there was this grouping of buildings here. Well, they were in need of a lot of maintenance, and instead of trying to sell them off or get it figured out as to how to best care for them, they were torn down. And this building's right across the street where I've got the arrow, these two buildings here, and this is kind of what it looks like the day that it was going to be knocked down. This is the Elks Club right over here. I'm sure many of you remember these buildings. But they had purchased these buildings and torn them down. I'm not sure exactly if they had plans to build something in this exact location or to have that area for sale. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was given back to the city. Another thing that by 1967 they had done, just a little bit further down River Street, right over here by Pine Street, they had all these buildings that were looking a little unsightly torn down as well. This building right here, 466, 464. This is this building right here. Kind of really cool building. But they had a plan in mind with tearing down these 5 or 6 structures that were located on here. They would tear them down, and they sold the property to the city for $1. So the city could build the marina and all the docks. So this is an aerial of this area. This would happen by 1968. Here's the Hotel Chippewa right here. Here's the little triangle, and then here is the Elks Club in that vicinity of where they were going to we're building the marina. And another view too. So this is essentially what happened, and there are various other moving parts to this too, but that's essentially how the marina came about. The Tuesday Committee and some demolition of buildings. I should also note that they did a lot of good throughout the community as well, fixing up a lot of buildings, painting them at a time when beautification wasn't as big of a thing. So they did a lot of good, but also as a historian, those buildings would be priceless now. But hey, we got a cool marina though, so I know what difference is it. So it goes. But this is essentially what happened, and this is kind of where in this vicinity is located now with the overlay. So, a couple things I want to leave you with. One, the lumbermen and why we have all these parks today and who they're named after. Very important people. They deserve to be remembered in the community. 2, beautification. That was a big call for a lot of these parks, and especially a lot of these small little parks that are no longer here anymore. And 3, the community getting together in order to do something about it and to make their neighborhoods look nice and to ensure that their neighborhoods would look nice. That happened all these years ago and still continues to today. There's a lot more to talk about with some of these other parks. There are other stories, not as grand, but still kind of interesting. And there are other small little parks that I didn't include in here because I wanted to get out of here by 10 o'clock. So anyways, that's my presentation. Do we have any questions while I still got some breath left? Go ahead, Jean.
I don't have a question.
No, sure.
But I have a newspaper article
Yes.
somewhere in my house
Mhm.
that I saved from the museum a long time
Mhm.
ago about a man named Joe Fisk.
Joe Fisk, yes.
Why don't we know more about him?
He owned the Racket Store, which was a very well-known store for decades here in Manistee, and supposedly for many people, including my dad, you could buy anything there, So he was a very well-known merchant here in Manistee for I think he was the oldest living merchant at the time of well, that wouldn't make sense at the time of his death. Oldest living merchant at the time of his death. He was he was the oldest. He had been on River Street for the longest at the time of his death.
Was he a champion of the dunes and nobody?
Yes, and he was. Yes, he was. Yeah, he was a big champion because I believe I'm not sure where he lived, but especially on the north side. I think there's an article, and it might be the same one that you have, where he talks about the dunes in the north side and how. Yes, yeah. I think I might have written some about that long. I forget about those after a while. But yeah, there was something involving him in the dunes. You're right. But yeah, he was a champion of the dunes and was a very well regarded businessman on River Street for many years. So I might have to republish that one. Go ahead. Yes.
Do you know what they did with the sand from people?
A lot of the sand, there were a couple different sand companies, and eventually through different consolidations, Sand Products Company became the de facto sand company in town. A lot of the sand was eventually shipped to the Ford Motor Company, where they made windshields and lights for automobiles. From what I've read, and I'm sure other things too, but I think that was kind of the primary thing for quite a while, quite a long period of time. Go ahead.
I saw that there was a master plan for Reeves Park
Mhm.
and Veterans Park
Mhm.
somewhat. There was for the marina.
Mhm.
Were there any other parks that were involved with the master plan?
I'm not entirely sure about that. I'm not entirely sure about that. There could be, but yeah, I'm not certain about that. But we'll have to look into it. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Sam's mansion
Mhm.
across from Tree Lutheran.
Mhm.
The rumor I always heard that he had Peters Park. They weren't any relation, Peters and Sam's?
No, as far as I know, no, they were not. Yeah. It could be just one of those vicious rumors in there, but there was a lot of intermarrying going on there, so we got true story. I'm not making that up. It's a true story, but it could very well have been, but to my knowledge, no. But yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Great
I certainly
job.
appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And I think we have someone from the Liz, I'll hand it back to you. Yes.
Thank you, it was extremely informative. And the underlying word that I kept hearing tonight was beautification. And we're still working on that. It isn't done. And everybody here, I think, has participated in some way or another, but there's plenty of an opportunity. There's sign-ups if you're interested. The Parks Commission, when I said it was a hands-on, we are hands-on. We've done several work bees, and it's been fun. And we're actually a good team. The work bees has created a good camaraderie amongst us. Kelly is with Manistee Proud. That's also a good hands-on group. So there's sign-ups out there if anybody is interested, and that we would just contact you when we needed someone. And the museum also has a sign up there. Mark needs heat. I mean, I went down there.
We finally got.
Oh, did you get heat? Okay. They need help.
It was a long process there. There wasn't any heat for Christmas down there, but I finally got her fixed.
Good.
But every cent helps certainly. So certainly appreciate you doing.
And volunteers. Mark is the only employee there.
I'm a one-man show down there.
It's a one-man show, and there's plenty of opportunities there. On behalf of the Parks Commission, we want to give you a little thank you.
I appreciate that.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Michelle wants to say just 1 minute, if you want 1 minute on the veterans, please we'll just do 1 minute.
Okay, since we talking about the parks and everybody here loves the parks, I just want you to know that remember this date, June 11th, the Spirit of the Woods Garden Club is having a dedication, and the dedication is for the Gold Star mothers. 12 years ago, we put in the marker that is there that you see in the byways for the veterans that served our country and have gave up their lives for that. And this year, we worked about a year for this dream to come true, that we would complete our exhibit by putting in for the Gold Star mothers. So on June 11th, I have some flyers Please come and attend. We want everybody. We will have some Gold Star mothers there. We will also have the Veterans Honor Guard that will be there, that will do their ritual. We will have the state garden president there. We will have the community bands going to be there. It will be a nice program. So please come and see us. And this will make our dream come true. And if you ask why we have trouble, we planted the Veterans Park 3 times this year. And if anybody knows the secret with the deer and the animals to get out of there, Weese's just loves us because we buy plants, we go plant them, and they pull them out, and they love them too. So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Take some cookies, and there's still plenty of cookies and hot chocolate left.
Liz, we gotta end the meeting, right? What did you say? We gotta end the meeting, right? So everybody back.
I make a motion.
Yeah. Do we have to go back to the station? Yeah.
We're gonna do?
And it.
Do we have to do that on, is the tape still running? Okay.
I just left it going.
Karen, come here for a sec.
I make a motion.
Adjourn.
Okay, all right.